Thank you for pressing start on Underplayed, KZUM's indie video game podcast. In this episode, we each have a secret game in review, and then we're taking a cooperative look at A Way Out and It Takes Two from Hazelight Studios. I'm Bo Po, and joining me is my player two, DiscoCola. How are you doing, Disco?
Hey. This is really exciting. We have these conversations all the time, and now we get to share it with you. There's a lot of passion when we get together on these topics.
Yes, I'm so excited for you to be here on this inaugural episode with me for Underplayed. As is appropriate with any new podcast at KZUM or anywhere, I'd like to talk about what we hope to accomplish with this show and how we'll structure it. But first, let's have the listeners get to know us as gamers a little bit, since this is a podcast about video games, ultimately. So what I'll have you do is share your gamer tag and maybe what it means to you, where it came from, where you like to play a lot of your games, so systems or ecosystems you like to game in, your favorite genres. So I'll start. Again, my gamer tag is BoPo. That's what I'm known as in a lot of ecosystems and on all the systems I play on. Where I play games, mostly a PlayStation, Nintendo, and PC gamer. Some of my favorite genres are platformers, action-adventure titles, and action RPGs. I got into indie games starting around 2008, which is when the world got games like Limbo and Braid and Castle Crashers, and those are the kinds of games that kicked off this modern popularity of indie titles that we've just seen grow and grow over the years. So what about you, Disco?
So my gamer tag is DiscoCola, sometimes characterized as DiscoCola 304. DiscoCola doesn't really come from anywhere. I don't know. I'm a big music lover, and I was in this counterculture mindset, in middle school or whatever. So it was like, disco's dead, but I like disco, even though I don't know that much about disco. And I'm a big soda drinker. In high school, I would blow half of my paycheck just at this local soda shop that we used to have, trying different flavors of soda. And then 304 comes from the ID number of my favorite Digimon.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. They sort of abandoned the ID number system not too long after that, so it's pretty irrelevant now, but I use it pretty frequently for things.
Interesting. That's reminiscent of what Pokemon does,
yes.
Right? With numbering all the Pokemon. I didn't know they did that with Digimon.
Yep. My favorite genres are mostly also platformers. I'm really big into Metroidvanias now, but really games that can grab you with a really unique stylized art style. I'll try a lot of different genres if they can draw me in with a cool art style. And I got into indie games probably around the same time, just because that's probably when that threshold was crossed for accessibility. Because before that, dev kits were probably a little too inaccessible for indie developers. Because everything before that was pretty much AAA or at least B tier kind of mainline stuff.
Yeah, the tools to make games have been very accessible for many thousands of developers. And so we've seen this exponential wave of games, like I said, over the past, 13 years since those games came out. And there were indie games before that, but that's really what started this genre that a lot of people follow.
And I think the ability to download games digitally, even though, as you'll find out as time goes on, I'm a big physical media person, but the ability to have not pay those production costs probably made a big difference for a lot of indie game developers.
Absolutely. All right, great introductions. So what is this podcast about? Here on Underplayed, we will celebrate the artistry, innovation, and pure fun of indie video games. In most episodes, we'll come prepared to each talk about a secret indie game the other doesn't know about, and we will always conclude with an in-depth review of a title we both agree to play. So we'll figure that out before each episode, do our homework, usually a week or two in between recordings, hopefully, to get those games played both the secret games and the featured cooperative review games. I find it necessary to also define what an indie or independent game actually is as we embark out on this. So as is the case with indie films and indie music, the definition of what an indie game is can be complicated, and I think it's changed over time. But ultimately, the games we talk about will usually have some qualities that they share. And I jotted down some qualities that I think we'll see show up quite a bit. So those qualities are that these games are typically created by individuals or smaller development teams. These games will typically lack the financial support, oversight, and influence of large publishers. And so they thus aren't considered AAA, like we would consider some more popular games that more people get their hands on. These games will often focus on innovation, experimentation, and providing unique gaming experiences. So those are just some of the ideas of what an indie game can be. These qualities might be subjective from person to person, but between the both of us, with our experience in all of our years of gaming, we generally know an indie game when we see and play them. So we've talked about this a lot off air. Like, we know what an indie game is. We're pretty much in agreement on the boundaries of what we're going to be playing in.
Yeah.
So
it just gets a little murky when you get, when you encounter someone who's like very technical about it.
yes.
And that's sort of why we're breaking this down. We're like, some of these lines are a little blurred these days.
With all the introductions out of the way, I think it's time now we can actually get into what we would typically hear on a regular show, which is starting with our secret games. Disco.
Secret games. Secret games. Secret games. Secret games.
Now, Disco and I have each played an indie game in secret over the past few weeks, and we will now reveal what we each played to each other live during this recording. And this is so exciting because I literally have no idea what you picked. I have no earthly idea what you chose to play. So, listener, as you're hearing it, I'm going to be hearing it for the first time. And also, you don't know what I've played. So, Disco, what is your secret game for episode 1 of Underplayed?
I am so glad that you said you have no earthly idea. My secret game is Forma.8. Yes.
Forma.8.
Forma.8.
Okay.
So
I don't think I know what this is.
Okay. Well, I have just sent you a little taste of that for you to look at while I go over this. Forma.8 is a 2D Metroidvania style game from a developer called Mixed Bag. This is a game that I picked up from Limited Run Games, and that's something you're going to hear me say very often. And it was a game that I hadn't really heard of before the order was available on Limited Run Games, but it dropped during a time when I was just sort of carelessly buying games that I thought looked cool without really kind of testing it out first, which is very irresponsible to do financially, by the way. The first thing that really grabbed my attention was like this really unique art style. The art style uses like super solid, very bold colors. Like I was streaming this and I mentioned that like there's no single world element that uses more than 4 colors at a time. And so like that really drew me in, and I was really excited about this like unique visual experience. And it was super unique for the time, I think. Like I wasn't seeing too many games like it from the time period it came out, which is 2016, I believe. And there are even points like during your exploration where the camera has like a scripted zoom in or out. And so sometimes you'll get a closer look at some of these like far background layers, and you'll get sort of like a visual look of something that's made out of construction paper, which is really cool. It's not made out of construction, but it looks cool. Anyways, the premise of the game is that you're this little levitating drone robot thing, and you're sent to the surface of the planet to explore with other formas. And I call them formas because of context provided by the trophies, and that's important to say because this game has no words inside the game, which calls back to another one of my favorite indie games, Hyper Light Drifter, which has like 4 words total in the game. It's like press circle to shoot. And so other than a couple of like scripted elements in the game that move the story forward, mostly you're just creating context yourself, just based on where you are, what's there, and what happens. So, for example, when I first started playing, I encountered the first group of like in-world life forms, and I specifically said that, you know, I was this invasive machine killing the local fauna. So I spent like a lot of time trying to avoid killing these creatures because, like, I don't know what their story is. But by the end of the game, I was like clearing rooms, you know, of all life before exploring and finding secrets. And I had a viewer that was watching me stream it pretty frequently by the name of Goliath. He helped out a lot, actually. And so he reminded me that I started my journey with like this like pacifist mentality.
Oh, okay. So he's keeping you on track.
Yeah. And he's like, hey, remember where you came from?
Yes.
Well, you run into points where you have to kill things anyway. So ultimately, there's a lot that I loved about this game. It's a Metroidvania, of course, with incredible art style. However, there was a point where I hit like a really significant wall. Like the difficulty spiked, and it spiked hard, and it was so sudden. And this is because there are some like progression-based power-ups hidden by puzzles that like didn't teach you how to complete them very well. So I got stuck there, and this is compounded by like the slow movement speed of the forma and the massive rooms. Like there's a map system, and it just totally does not communicate the actual scale of the world, because you have this like, I don't know, 10 pixel by 20 pixel rectangle, but the room is just massive, and the scale is so wild. Now, conversely, there are some like really intelligently designed puzzles. Like, for example, there's an enemy that acts as like a wall obstacle, and you learn that you have to deflect shots back at him in order to defeat it. And that's the only way to defeat this enemy. This principle returns for like a boss fight pretty soon after, but it's varied. Like the thing that you reflect back is different, but it gives you like sound cues and color cues that are similar to that enemy before. So there's some really intelligent puzzles, and there's some puzzles that are really frustrating. There's a couple of really cool like sound design things, like all the sound effects are really cool. There's also points in the game where like they play with stereo early on, so like if you're on the right side of something, you hear it in your left ear. So that was some nice attention to detail that they didn't need to do. But the music is a little underwhelming. Like it's mostly ambient, which is good for an alien exploration sort of game. But there wasn't like a lot of variety. Like none of these songs would probably play well on the radio, with one exception, I think. So I could have used a little bit more from the music. So ultimately, I gave it a 7.5 out of 10. Progression of abilities feels natural and rewarding, which means a lot to me. And my love for Metroidvania is mostly based on a love for item collections. So like to have those items feel like a natural progression is nice. But there's just like a few too many points of like pretty significant frustration with navigation and some puzzles that were a little too confusing, I think. And I know I could just be dumb, but it felt like I wasn't taught very well as far as a couple of these puzzles go.
Well, I'll say I'm a mild fan of the Metroidvania genre. I haven't played every single, top tier, well-known Metroidvania game out there. So I have not heard of this game. Like I said, forma.8. I think maybe the logo is familiar to me. Like I've seen that somewhere, but I've never looked into it. And as I'm looking at this, it's not what immediately is conjured in my mind when I think Metroidvania. There's this guy floating around in this space in a game that kind of reminds me of what Pixel Junk games sometimes do, like Pixel Junk Shooter.
Yeah.
1 and 2 kind of looks like this. There's a mobile game I played a long time ago on, one of my early iPhones called Badland, I believe. And I
Okay.
think Badland might also be on consoles, but look up Badland. I think visually it looks very similar to this. And then I'm also kind of getting like, I guess, Ori and the Blind Forest kind of from this. But yeah, fascinating. I'm looking at the launch trailer for Switch that they did, and it looks beautiful. I mean, this looks really fun to play. So.
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up just to quickly put a bow on this. Metroidvanias are usually defined by like your ability to jump.
Mhm.
And that totally is removed here. And so that's kind of why it doesn't immediately feel like a Metroidvania. But when you look at the formula of what a Metroidvania is, it does meet all of the technical tick marks. And so that's kind of why it is classified as such. But yeah, you're right. It feels like so outside of that box just because you can't jump. And I never thought of that.
Cool. Well, up top, we talked about, what kinds of qualities we'll find in these indie games. And one of those qualities I listed was that these games should provide unique gaming experiences and should be innovative in some way. I totally see that in how you've described this game. So
absolutely.
Cool.
This is available on PS4, Vita, digitally and physically for both. It is available on Switch, PC, and Wii U.
Wow. It is everywhere. Like if you have an older system, if you have a PC, I'm sure almost any PC could run this game. It doesn't look too graphically taxing. Or if you have a more modern console like a Switch or PS4, you should be able to play Forma 8. Thank you, Disco. That was Disco's secret game for episode 1 of Underplayed. It's time for my secret game, Disco. Are you ready?
Yeah.
My secret game is Virginia.
Oh, okay. I haven't heard of this.
So Virginia is developed by Variable State, and it is a first-person mystery adventure walking simulator. In this game, you play as an FBI agent named Ann Tarver as she investigates her first case in a small Virginian town called Kingdom, where a boy has disappeared. You're soon joined by a fellow agent named Maria Halperin, and together you have to explore the various locations in this small town, and you interact with objects and other characters, and you unravel surprises about what's really going on. The game, just like Forma 8, is completely speechless, instead relying on music and visuals to guide everything.
No way.
And the whole experience only takes about 90 minutes to finish. It's very cinematic. You can sit down and absorb it and finish it in one sitting, which I find really appealing because so many games these days are way too long. So this game is based partly on an actual FBI investigation that took place in the summer of 1992, an actual missing persons case that happened in a small Virginia town. And they took the details of that case and wrote this game. And Disco, I gotta say, the story here is so weird. What starts as a straightforward missing persons case quickly transforms into something that is 10 times more strange, 10 times more upsetting, 10 times more disorienting than what I expected going in. When you start the game, in the menu, there's a note from the devs, and they talk about the journey in making this game. And they end by saying, "It's been a strange and confounding experience making Virginia. We hope it's resulted in a strange and confounding game." And those are perfect words to describe this game because, like I said, the game starts fairly traditional and only gets more abstract and even psychologically thrilling as time goes on. Eventually, you realize you never quite know what's going to happen. And the story often swerves in ways that are impossible to predict, not always in a completely fulfilling way, honestly, but more so to be disorienting and unpredictable. The story bits are hard to piece together, admittedly, and the journey can be esoteric, ambiguous, and dreamlike. And as a result, this game feels like a mood piece, and you need to do work to get meaning and value out of the story. It's not as simple as relaxing and laying back and just kind of letting the story happen to you. You have to be attentive. You have to piece things together. You have to make hypotheses about what's going on and see if they work out later on in the journey. For instance, there are motifs of cardinals, feathers, and buffalo, and there's a lot of open-endedness to what those things refer to. So you'll see these images pop up again and again, not always directly tied to what's going on, sometimes hallucinated and by the character. So a lot's going on here, and it only happens in 90 minutes. So a lot of ideas are crammed into this experience. Every player can interpret and understand different things from this game, and the themes I took away are how corrupt government systems can be, how hard it can be to break the bond between collaborators, and the power of seeing things from others' perspectives. But it's very possible you could play this game and come away with completely other themes and topics to discuss. And like I mentioned up top, Virginia is a walking simulator mystery, pretty much composed of various scenes that play out in a mostly scripted fashion. And I will admit, often the walking sim bits feel very directed and narrow. So as you're exploring this town, there aren't a lot of options to discover or interact with objects other than the item that will progress the story to the next scene, if that makes sense. I would have preferred maybe to have a little bit more interactivity in the environment and have more options for items to pick up. So between all these scenes, the transitions can happen very abruptly. You might be walking along and the scene might cut abruptly while you're pushing the stick forward and you're in the next scene. It might be a different time of day. And that really keeps you drawn in because you never know when the scene's going to transition. Sometimes you're free to walk about and explore until you find the item you need to touch. Other times you're on a timer and you have a defined amount of time to view the environment you're in. And you don't always know whether you're about to be transported away to the next scene without warning. My favorite part of the game is the music, by far. The soundtrack comes to us from the City of Prague Philharmonic Orchestra, and it's exceptional. It's often beautiful, sometimes dramatic and tense. It crescendos in important scene changes, and it even gave me goosebumps a few times. And without the music, I don't think the emotional moments would have had the same impact. So I highly encourage you to check out the soundtrack to this game. It is absolutely wonderful, and it's what I've thought back to. The visuals remind me of some other games I've played, like The Witness or Firewatch, which have very lush, colorful worlds that look realistic. Although the characters themselves look a bit cartoony, they communicate emotion very well. So my verdict on this game is that what makes Virginia great and memorable is its experimental story, both in what it covers and how it's told. It's for gamers who appreciate bite-sized but ambiguous stories. And personally, I would give it a 6 out of 10.
Okay. As I was watching some of that gameplay that you sent me, I noticed, stylized art style, huge fan of that. The colors were really vibrant. And I was impressed at the scale. Like there was a scene there where it was pulling back on just like this, wave of trees, this wall of trees. And I was impressed with like how good that looked. But the thing that really, really stood out the most with what I was seeing was that, and you touched on it, is that the characters convey emotion. And I think I picked up on like some of what's causing that. And it's just, you said that they're cartoonish, but they have a surprising amount of nuance to their faces. Like lips will move in just like these slight ways to convey certain emotions. Their eyebrows seem to be moving in a specific way that usually isn't applied to games like this. You usually have like surprised look and happy look and like I'm thinking of like Donut County simplicity visually, but there's a lot more nuance going on here in the articulation of the face.
I talked about being confused at times with the story, not understanding always what things meant while I was going through this journey. And it was never because I didn't understand how a character was feeling. Mm-hmm. And characters are very important to this. There are, you play as Ann Tarver, the, kind of new FBI investigator, and you're spending a lot of this game with Maria, your partner, and you're doing this investigation. The relationship and the bond that Anne and Maria have is very important to what plays out in this game. And Maria emotes things so well. Characters will gesture in ways or interact with objects with a certain energy that just conveys what they're feeling very well. Mm-hmm. I was never confused about what characters were trying to say, even though they weren't speaking words. Like because as I said, this is a wordless game. So it was an instance of them doing a lot more with really little. And if you read that note from the devs, they talk about how they went through a lot of financial hardships. Actually, they had to pour a lot of their own money into making this game. It's kind of a miracle that it got made after you read this story. So I get the impression that, maybe they weren't able to invest in a lot of the tech to make the detailed characters that maybe they would have preferred, but they made it work all the same.
Yeah.
So that's my secret game, Virginia. It is playable on PC, PS4, and Xbox One. So, Disco, now it's that time.
It's that time.
To cooperatively review A Way Out and It Takes Two.
This is a little bit of a unique cooperative look.
It is, because most episodes we will be taking a look at just one game. But since this is our first episode of Underplayed, we wanted to pick two special games for the occasion. We picked games that are strictly cooperative and that we happened to play earlier this year. So they're very fresh in our minds. And they are A Way Out and It Takes Two from Hazelight Studios. I'd like to start with A Way Out. Even though we played A Way Out second, it released chronologically first in 2018. And then we'll get to It Takes Two, which released this year in 2021. So A Way Out is a split-screen, third-person action-adventure game where you and your partner control Vincent and Leo, two convicted prisoners who work together to break out of prison and avoid the authorities. During the game, both players perform complementary tasks, and the backstories of both men are slowly revealed. So, Disco, I want to start with you on this game. What are your overall thoughts on A Way Out?
Well, if it wasn't clear, Bopo and I played both of these games together, and that's why we thought it would be such a fitting start. And I played the role of Vincent in this game. So overall, my thoughts are sort of similar to what you were saying with Virginia, and that it's kind of a walking sim. However, it takes sort of like an opposite approach to really draw you into the game. Whereas Virginia is a silent game, no speech, A Way Out really builds the world with speech. There's a lot of just background characters that you can interact with, or background elements that you can interact with that really make the world feel more organic, but oftentimes don't actually impact the game at all, which I find very fascinating, and we'll see that show up again later. So I would say that was probably one of the most impactful things about A Way Out. I think that my experience with A Way Out was hurt by two things. One, the ending was spoiled for me before I'd even known that I was going to play it. And then the other thing that I think hurt it a little bit was that we played it second, and I like It Takes Two quite a bit more. And it's not totally fair to compare them, apples to apples. It's a cooperative game, and your actions, complement the other player. And they're both sort of organic feeling. But there's just it's a little too much. It fits more into a genre that I am less fond of.
I think you just summarized some of the thoughts that I couldn't articulate or put into words myself about what this game is compared to its successor, which we will get to It Takes Two and how much we love that. But yeah, playing It Takes Two this year, we should give the context of It Takes Two was kind of a phenomenon this year in 2021. And it seemed like it was the hot game for a good month to 6 weeks. Everybody was talking about this online. It was a great kind of unique activity to do with somebody in a time where, a lot of people were still social distancing with the COVID-19 pandemic. People had been used to being in lockdown for well over a year, but people were kind of craving a new experience. That's where It Takes Two came in. But because we played It Takes Two and had such a great time, I wanted to go back and explore A Way Out and just see, like, where did this come from? How has this studio progressed? And so I think you raised some interesting things that will be good once we cover both games to maybe compare the two and see the evolution that we've taken and maybe what we'll see going forward from this studio. So any other overall thoughts?
Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to sound like it was a bad game. I'm sure if we would have played this one first, that, I would be perfectly satisfied with it. And I would think of it a lot more fondly than I do now, because the dialogue is well written. Characters are compelling. Motivations at times seem unrealistic, occasionally. And you brought that point up, like, as soon as we were done playing, like some of these motivations don't make a lot of sense. And then I agree with you. So yeah, touching story, compelling story, great voice performances from everyone, including these, throwaway background characters. A lot of great lines there as well.
My overall thoughts on A Way Out. Honestly, this game feels a little rough around the edges for me, but I think it still provides a rare cooperative experience that really sets the stage for It Takes Two. So if you happen to want to play both games, I would say play A Way Out first. Get that one under your belt. And then I think you'll be able to really appreciate It Takes Two for the advancements it makes. But I found the characters of Leo and Vincent to be mildly interesting. The most engaging bits of story came as we learned more about their past, which happens periodically enough. Part of the game feels very earnest, like the focus on the family and the men's past lives before prison. But other parts feel a bit like a silly B movie, such as the goofy interactions with random NPCs and the cheesy one-liners. I agree with you that the performances are great, but I just found that inconsistency there for me, in that, it tried to be a serious thing at times. At other times, it just felt like it was kind of a schlocky, kind of goofy, not taking itself too seriously, tongue-in-cheek experience as well. Some of my favorite gameplay moments were being on the run from the law after escaping from prison. So relatively early on, you actually do escape from prison, which I don't think is a spoiler because so much of the game happens as you're on the run. And there are those moments where things seem a little too quiet, like where there's a scene at a farm that was particularly fun for me because I didn't know where the story was going to take us next. And that mystery and kind of just feeling like I could be taken anywhere in this experience with you right now was welcome from me. There's some great high energy action and chase scenes that don't seem like they would work in a co-op game on paper, but they have great choreography and staging in A Way Out. So times where we're both following a guy, chasing a guy down, and, I have a segment where I'm doing stuff and we can see each other's screens at any time, but I am locked in on what I'm doing. And then, the guy gets away and now he's closer to you and you have a gameplay segment and I get to kind of look over at your side of the screen and watch. So that was kind of fun. I love the length of this game. It's roughly 7 hours. It makes the game completable in only 2 or 3 sittings. I love shorter experiences with how many games there are again these days. Like, shorter the better for me usually, unless it's so good that I could get, any amount and be happy. But I didn't feel that way with this game. 4/5 of the way through the game, it basically turns into a third-person shooter, kind of like The Division or Gears of War. That was a little odd to me. And I felt very conflicted about the ending. Without spoiling anything, I thought the turns the story takes provide for some great drama, but they kind of felt out of place for the kind of experience this game is designed to give players and that I was hoping to get out of this. So those are my overall thoughts on A Way Out. If I were to score this, I would probably give it a 5 out of 10. And I think much of that score is the enjoyment of just being able to do a cooperative game with you. I haven't thought back to it a whole lot in a way that It Takes Two has made me reminisce about that experience.
Right. I would score it just a little bit higher just because I know that so much of my negativity comes from playing it second. So I'd probably give it a 5.5 or a 6. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think about it too much. And if I put it in the context of if it was a 1-player game and the second player was an AI, I probably wouldn't have played it.
Gotcha. I agree with that. Well, Disco, let's move on to It Takes Two, which is, again, a split screen, third person action adventure game where you and your partner control Cody and May, a married couple who are planning on divorcing. Their daughter, Rose, wishing for them to stay together, sheds tears on her handmade doll versions of her parents, which casts a spell of sorts and transports Cody and May to live inside the dolls. As miniature beings, the everyday world becomes strange and big, and Cody and May must work together while showing patience and respect to repair their marriage. I will start with my overall thoughts on It Takes Two. I thought this was a completely fulfilling game from top to bottom. It's a game all about partnership, communication, and patience, which few games offer so completely as this one. The gameplay mechanics often echo the themes of the story that are happening at a particular moment. The game is so packed full of ideas from top to bottom that the gameplay and environments always feel fresh. This is accomplished through puzzles, abilities, mini games that we get to play, and types of platforming. The game's cooperative nature feels necessary through and through, even more so than A Way Out. There's a reason this game is cooperative, and it's apparent through the story and through how we play the game. There's so much game in this game that I can't at one time remember every part of it, which I think is maybe both a good and a bad thing. Good because all of it feels so fun to play. Maybe bad because it doesn't feel disciplined in its length like A Way Out. In fact, it's about twice the length, I would estimate, of the first game. It's very charming and funny, though. Hakeem, who is kind of a secondary character who's helping Cody and May out, he brings some unexpected levity and variety. I was trying to think of a favorite moment in this game, and it was honestly really hard to pick because of how varied this experience is throughout. I remember us both particularly liking a section where it turned into an isometric hack and slash game where I had a flame sword and you were an ice wizard, and it happened late in like chapter 3. And it was such a small little moment, but it has stayed with me because we both remarked to each other like, oh my gosh, I love your power. Oh, I love your power. Look at us. We're kicking butt. So that was really fun. Tons of moments like that, though. So again, it's hard to choose a favorite moment. So I loved it. I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. I think this is going to be in my top 10 of the year if I do compose a top 10 games of 2021. We won't do that officially for this show, but of all the games I've played this year that have come out in the calendar year, it's up there. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, I agree. I'll start by saying that, and I think of it even more fondly than any game that I really played from 2020, thinking back. Yeah, my thoughts on It Takes Two mirror yours a lot. One of the things, I watched this creator called Game Maker's Toolkit, and one of his rules of thumb is that if the game feels fun to just play around in, then you've got a good game. And that's the case here. Because, like, the dash alone, like the little dash that you have alone, and the way that it animates, especially Cody's body. By the way, I played as Cody.
Yes, I played as May.
And I would just, like, run around the room while we were trying to figure out, okay, well, where's the next area? Let's make sure we don't miss any trophy collectibles. I would just dash around the room because it felt good to do that. And like grappling feels good. Sledding feels good. That's a part of the game that I remember very well, is like Cody and May were bantering back and forth. and this is, toward the end of the game. So, they're more able to talk to each other. And so like they're bantering back and forth to each other. And so were we. We were talking at each other in that playful manner, and it was just so fun to be sledding. So yeah, the game just feels good. One of the things that took me a minute to totally get a grasp on, and it probably wasn't even until like maybe our third or fourth session, is the scale of the world. because we start in the shed and then we're in the tree. And so I'm looking at all of these like obstacles that we're traversing,
Mhm.
and I'm thinking these are to scale, but how can there be all of this stuff, underneath the tree, essentially?
Yeah.
But it's not until we get to Rose's room that I'm like, oh no, this is fantastical. There's no way that all of this stuff is here, because you see just like this ocean of ball pit balls with
Yeah.
like ball pit ball waterfalls. And so it took me a while to realize how much of my belief I was, disbelief that I was supposed to suspend.
Right.
So I would say that's like one of the only drawbacks, I would say. I love all the little mini games. I don't love all of the mini games, but I love that they are there as like a break from what at times can feel a little bit linear.
Yeah.
But the world's so like big compared to A Way Out that it doesn't totally feel like it's linear. There's one moment in the game that is totally devastating, and I hate it.
And I know what you're talking about.
It's messed up, man.
It is messed up.
But I guess that means it was well written too.
I actually have here in my notes that moment is morbid. I said that it's morbid.
That's a very good word for it.
Yeah. And it just comes out of nowhere. But you know what? Those moments are sprinkled throughout. There are moments that happen that are unlike all the other moments in the game. And I just remember us exclaiming to each other over voice chat, like, is this happening? Or, hey, can you do this? Or do you see what I'm supposed to do? Or do you see what I'm doing? I just love all of those interactions that this game creates for us.
Yeah, and it harkens back to a word that you said in your thoughts, and that was patience. Like, we have to have patience, because there's moments where I have to explain to Bopo, like, no, you have to hammer here. Like, look at, the yellow means that's where I shoot my nail.
Yes.
Like,
yes.
So it does require that patience. Yeah. Other than that, I love callbacks to other games, or even like callbacks to a developer at one point, which was really funny, I think.
I don't know if I remember this moment.
This is, it actually plays a role in one of the trophies you have to pop when you're playing with satellites.
Yes.
So self-referential stuff doesn't always work, but I think it works here. So yeah, the music, not necessarily super memorable, but still like good. But I would say like the themes from the attic, that's when the music really, really hits. And I always want to try and touch on music when I can. So
Awesome.
Yeah, the music in the attic is really awesome.
Yeah.
The rest of it, like it's like a movie score, and A Way Out's the same way, but it doesn't always like play well on radio. And that's a phrase you'll hear me say a lot.
It complements what we're doing in the moment, but standalone, it might not be something you'd want to just casually listen to.
Exactly.
But yeah, the build up to the focus on music at the end of the game really does feel powerful, because we haven't been as laser focused on music up to that point. That gives the music parts room in that last chapter to really shine. That last scene was really emotional and very powerful.
Yep, we get something really catchy out of it.
Yes, we
in
do.
the long run.
Yes, we do.
I score it just a little bit higher. I give it a 9. A lot of that has to do with playing the game with my best friend Bopo.
Oh, thank you, Disco. I love that. I'm not sure why 8.5 sounded right. It just sounded right for me. But we're right there. We both love It Takes Two. Well, I think that'll do for our reviews of A Way Out and It Takes Two. I think it's safe to assume we both are fans of Hazelight Studios. And we're both looking forward to what they make next. And Disco, before we leave, I just want to ask, assuming they stick with this co-op niche that they have going on, as these are their only 2 games, and we can only assume they're going to continue to make games after the success of It Takes Two, what do you hope for in Hazelight's next game?
Well, I think they've got good dialogue writing down, especially 2-person dialogue. So I hope they maintain that. What I hope that they continue is just like fun gameplay mechanics that fit inside of the world. So whereas A Way Out, it doesn't make sense for you to have a dash.
Right. Yeah.
So I guess I hope the next game is also just has a little touch of a fantasy element, just so that we can have these fantastical body movements that are actually fun to do instead of just being, 5'6" Leo, doing some dips.
Right. Oh, those dips were not fun, but we needed to get a trophy. I hope they stick with some of the sci-fi and fiction elements they explored in It Takes Two. I also hope they find a way to explore another kind of relationship that we haven't seen in either game. So maybe a story about a parent and child, although that might be a little too similar to It Takes Two. Maybe about coworkers, or what if they explore people from different class structures? There's a lot of interesting directions they could take.
Could take it in an animal direction.
They
Doesn't
could.
even have to be a person.
Yeah, very true. That would be very cool. Anything they do, I'm going to trust their ideas. But yeah, I'm looking forward to what they do next. And we might not see it for a few years, but I'd like to play whatever they make with you.
Absolutely.
All right, let's end it there. That's our review of It Takes Two. You can play it on PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Series S and X, and PC. Disco rated it a 9. I rated it an 8.5. That's the end of this episode of Underplayed. You can find more of our episodes at kzum.org/underplayed. Our music was composed by Jack Rodenberg. Our art comes from Onimochi. My name's Bopo, and you can find me on Twitter at Bopo. That's BO_PO.
And I'm at DiscoCola on Twitter and Twitch, and you can catch me streaming most Underplayed games. We stream these together.
Next time, we'll have 2 more secret games. In our featured review, we'll cover Night in the Woods, an adventure game developed by Infinite Fall. Until then, everyone, keep on playing.